thanks very much for arranging this and inviting me. And I really love the opportunity to be here and sort of get outside and really talk to artists who are approaching this issue from such a different way. So, I mean, one thing which we do is typically approach human behavior in terms of, if we think about air pollution, how we typically approach human behavior is like, how do you get people to avoid air pollution, or how do you get people to emit less? And that's really challenging because it seems to be quite an invisible problem often. So except when you have a massive smog, typically every day though, you don't think about how do you reduce your emissions. And for that, we either try to get people to be more motivated by, say, giving them more information and facts, or you really change the context in which they behave by just providing better infrastructure, by changing social norms. What really struck me about some of Josefina's work is how she makes the invisible really visible and really sort of brings that to life. And I was wondering if you could talk about what sort of got you, into that approach, and how do you actually get people to connect to the issue? Because we send people like reminders, text messages to get them to change their behavior, but the way you do it is completely different. So.
Firstly, thank you for having me here. It's very exciting to expand on my practice for a little while here. And yeah, so just briefly gonna introduce. I'm interdisciplinary artist, and I mix art, science, and technology in my work to create these fleeting moments, which then kind of bring a different kind of experientiality and presence to our everyday life. And what you just mentioned about the invisible, I guess a really good example is one of my recent projects, which is called Kairos 2 app. And it's an augmented reality and a mobile app that everyone can download from the app stores, and it renders visible the invisible air pollution. So it uses real-time data of atmospheric aerosols and creates these animated particles which move according to the change of data. And what really got me into this whole invisible realm of atmospheric aerosols is their rapid change. So it's incredible how much the air is changing every moment. And this project is really kind of giving everyone a chance to experience this on their daily life basis, so through their mobile phone. So it's a project as well which is not tied to experiencing art in museums or galleries, but you can access to it every time, every day, or when you have a moment for it. And in my practice, it's very important to create these ongoing processes, because I find that this kind of creates a different kind of presence, a personal relationship through art. So when using real-time data, it has allowed me to create this process which is unique every moment. And I think this really kind of brings a different kind of concentration to the experience.
So that's really interesting, because I've been thinking about as well in terms of ongoing processes, right? Because we've had one of the biggest shifts in our lives, I think, is COVID and a global pandemic. Mm. And that really gave people a break in kind of basically the ambient atmosphere and how they experienced air, because in some places, because there was just quite strict lockdown, people got to experience much cleaner air than they typically would have. Mm. And I feel people might have noticed that. And now when we're lifting as well, I'm sure people will experience that change quite differently. I was wondering, because I was looking at your app as well, I was trying to sort of experience it. When you think about changing, like, does it actually capture the change in the environment like that, depending on the day, using real-time data? Like, how does it work?
Oh, so because unfortunately our mobile phones don't have air pollution sensors.
Exactly. I was just, oh, that would have been really cool. Like, how do you,
Yeah. One day.
Yeah.
Because it's such a critical issue. So I'm sure we all need to access this information. And this app is kind of like a prototype maybe for this.
Yeah.
But so the data is coming from a research station.
Yeah.
And I had a great opportunity to collaborate with atmospheric scientists in order to create this app or develop this app. And it's a research station, actually. It's located in Finland, but they have the longest measurement of aerosols in the world. And it's an international research station with lots of different instruments to measure air. And incredible place, because you think, how can we know so much about air? But actually you know a lot from these like tiny little particles. Yeah. So the data, what the app is using, it's reading 3 different instruments, and these instruments are actually huge towers which take air samples every 30 seconds. And it's reading 1 nanometer, 1 micrometer, and 10 micrometer size aerosol data. Right. So we are talking about something incredibly
tiny.
Invisible. Yeah. And and the view on the app is changing according to this data, and the speed and the sound and the motion.
Right. Is it sampled from a particular place?
Yes, it's coming from this research station.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
And then what is also interesting, like even though it's coming from this one location, but in a way, like with air, it doesn't really consider any geographical or political borders. Like the aerosols move a lot. So I think it's also like a really good way, when we think about aerosols, is to create this connection to the interconnectivity of climate and environment. Because in 1 nanometer aerosol, actually, it's always a mix of natural and anthropogenic influence. So we can never really kind of separate those. So I think it's also part of this experience. And in the app, you'll also find like a small information section where you can just read a little bit more if you get curious. Yeah. Of course, this is more about visualizing the information and making it approachable for the audience. So it's not gonna tell everything about everything, but it's like a little glimpse of how we can approach air, maybe in a different way.
I mean, because we think about like, so in my work, I guess, when we're thinking about how do you get people to say avoid air pollution, typically the way you make it visible, or you make the issue visible, is by sending people an alert on their phone, or if they have an app, you check using a traffic light signal, you know, on a high pollution day, low pollution day, should we change a mode of transport instead? And that takes a lot of motivation to sort of plug into an app like that every day. But also it can be really worrying because it's not a very fun issue to think about, right? So we know that people get a bit anxious. So often one of the reasons they might do something to change it is because they're anxious, but that's not necessarily the best way to keep motivating people. So something like this, I thought, really gets at it from a different angle. It sort of makes it interesting and makes it fun, and sets a whole different sort of experiences in. And I was wondering, is that kind of what you intended with the app, to make people curious about it, or to have, what feeling did you want to leave people with?
Maybe to encounter the environment in a very personal and intimate level and slow down the experience. Right. So I think when you focus on something what you can't really see, you really need to start to imagine more. So it has this like kind of productive approach, I guess. That the experience can then expand to something else, and then this can then create benefit.
Yeah,
it's our approaches and attitudes.
It's more mindful.
Yes. And
yeah,
ongoing experiences, my starting point is always to kind of slow down this moment and somehow try to capture it, even though, of course, once we are experiencing it, we are almost losing it at the same time. So I think it creates like a precious relationship to the work as well.
That's really interesting. I think that's a good segue for the second one, which was on supersaturation, because that is lots of fleeting moments, right? Because it's a big panel, and maybe you could tell us a bit about that and how you sort of moved from this slowing down to like quite a bigger,
Yes. So in the Kairos app, I was focusing on one single particle, I guess, and its change. and how this one particle can then influence bigger systems in the environment and bigger, longer processes.
Yeah.
In Supersaturation, I was looking into the role of clouds,
Mm-hmm.
the relationship between clouds and atmospheric aerosols. So through this moment of supersaturation, which is actually a scientific or natural phenomenon, where an aerosol produces a cloud condensation seed, and through this process, an aerosol then influences cloud formation. So, and it's kind of moved from air to atmosphere and towards the formation of clouds. And of course, the role of clouds have very poetic status, but also in our kind of technology-oriented world, it also means something else. So supersaturation is kind of bringing these together, and I'm using supersaturation as an artistic concept of kind of creating clouds with data coming from the clouds. So the work or the ongoing process, again, it's endless. It uses vast amount of scientific data measured from the clouds and from aerosol formation, which influences cloud formation. And then it has a vast amount of footage from the clouds. But then this editing process is totally controlled by the data and the change of data. So everything is real time.
Yeah.
And this is, I guess, always when using real-time data, it really expands the experience. And so whatever you see is not controlled, it's controlled by the environmental change. And also it's kind of challenging our experience of like, what is this saturation about? Like,
right.
are we in oversaturation or supersaturation in our living habitat now? Or when it's like, are we on the edge or are we beyond the edge? Or kind of, where is this culmination point? Like when we talk about also global warming or something like this, or extinction or something, are we beyond now, or when is this moment? And what does it feel like to experience? But again, I'm taking it more kind of a sensory approach to it. The work is very meditative and slow, and it also includes sound, and it's kind of, you can just contemplate on the clouds.
Yeah, that was, so two things sort of struck me there. One was, like we often feel awe and a sense of, when you see something quite big and much bigger than yourself. On the one hand, it can be quite empowering. On the other hand, it can also be quite kind of scary if you feel like you don't have control. So, something which we always try to do is move away from fear, because there's a strand of literature which looks at how emotions change your behavior. And it's nascent and really interesting. But one thing we do know quite clearly is that fear can be demotivating because it's associated with higher uncertainty and less individual control. But then on the other hand, another emotion, kind of like awe, can be quite awe-inspiring, or happiness can be quite a different positive way to get potentially at the same sort of action and behaviors. And when I was looking at the pictures, I was like thinking, awe is quite an interesting emotion which we don't really fully have a grip on. And that could be also partly because of the music you use. So I was wondering, how do you select the music and the image, and what was your process there? Because I don't know if there's, I think this should be research on how music changes behavior as well, but that was quite like, struck me as quite an interesting combination of senses to use.
Yeah, I guess in my work, everything is connected, like interconnected. Also the sound is like powered by the data, and then it's linked to the video, and everything is like kind of in a constant flux. And then when a viewer experiences the work, when they understand this, then they also start to think about the content and how that is interdependent on us and other things and our decisions and political behavior and all this. So I guess it's just creating these interrelations to realize the interrelations around us and the process we are embedded in.
Absolutely. But like, how do you select the music? Like, was there a track which you feel like you came across and that would sort of fit, or Or was it kind of a more systematic, like, like when you said it's manipulated by the data, what does that mean? Like,
Well, I guess my approach to data is because it's access. So I want to use as much of data as I can.
yeah,
So it's the same with the sound. So I had many multiple sound tracks which are then edited with the data. So like supersaturating.
yeah,
And I worked with a composer who we talk a lot about clouds and atmospheric
right.
air and kind of airy realms.
How did you feel when you were creating, I guess in a particular moment when you were creating this, like, how did you feel? What motivated, because I'm wondering, like, what motivated you to create this piece? Like, was it a particular emotional relationship with the cloud, or?
Well, part of the process was also to film hours and hours and hours of clouds.
Yeah.
So I really had to be present with them.
Yeah.
I guess through that process, I became more observant even than before. Like
Yeah.
clouds have been quite a long-term fascination for me, but
Yeah.
still, when you are there with the camera and like trying to find the right view to the clouds or use really big lenses in order to reach the edge of the cloud, it's
Yeah.
kind of they clouds talk to me about the speculative and the potentiality. Like for me, a cloud is always something what we can imagine about. And I guess this is also like my approach to the role of clouds in climate change. Like, yes, they reflect and absorb sunlight, and it has different kind of consequences in our environment, but also
Yeah.
there is always this like uncertainty with them, and
Yeah.
also science doesn't know everything about the role of clouds
Yeah.
either. So there's
Absolutely.
and imagination, which I want to bring to the audience.
Yeah, there's also sort of like they seem to have also a life of their own, right?
Yes.
And like tipping point, and so they feel like they have agency as well. When I was looking at the pictures, I was like, oh, that's a lot like they have a pattern, or a sense of there's some sort of system in the chaos there.
Exactly.
And actually being immersed in that is, I was thinking, because that's a nice thing to get to the last one we were thinking of looking at, which is actually being immersed in nature. Well, in this sense, it's in the clouds, but also like immersed in nature when you're actually creating a piece. And we have there's a strand of literature which tries to invoke connectedness to nature as a way to motivate people. So the idea is, so there's a theory called biophilia, for instance, which suggests that everybody has an innate connection with nature because we've evolved from there. And actually those who are more connected to nature tend to be more interested in spending time in nature, helping nature, more connected to things like conservation, etc. And of course, one way to look at it is a trait, but more likely it's something that you can build and evolve, right? Through things like environmental education, through actually spending time in nature. So I was wondering, with this piece, that seemed to be a really interesting thing. I was wondering, like, wow, imagine if we could use something like this to actually build a connection to nature. But it's also mediated through technology, which is an interesting thing, right? Because you often find them, posed as opposites.
Yes. So this new project, I emerged from the isolation period, really.
Yeah.
It's called atmospheric unknowing, and I guess I just talked about speculative, and I think unknowing is almost like going beyond this, because it's almost like trying to get rid of what we know in order to then experience everything anew. And through this work, I encourage people to experience forests anew, create a different kind of relationship to it through this meditative walk, and by kind of also performing in nature. So the project is located in the boreal forest in Finland, and it includes 8 kind of stops, which I marked with different text, laser cut on this invisible acrylic perspex.
Mm.
And some of the text is quite difficult to read, so you really need to use your body and kind of in order to find, firstly in order to find the work because it's very invisible, and then secondly in order to read it you need to like kind of tune into it.
Bend a bit.
Yeah, exactly. And then the poetics what I've written are coming from my research from air and clouds and forests, because all these three have kind of symbiotic relationships. So through if we think about the scent of the forest, it's a result from chemical reactions from the trees.
Yeah.
And then this creates then atmospheric aerosols through oxidation and all kinds of complicated processes. And then these aerosols then create clouds. So it's kind of bringing everything together, I guess. But also it's a very simple work because it's a meditative walk, which maybe takes 1 hour in the forest. And for me, one of the starting points was like how to be as subtle as possible with nature, because already everything is there. So I don't really have much to add.
Yeah. That's so true, and it's so beautiful because I think you can accentuate and sort of bring that relationship out, right? Mm-hmm. And that's what I thought was really wonderful about this piece, was actually the fact that with quite a minimal approach, yet it's quite sophisticated because you actually have to play with your body and exist in that space. And as you were saying, bend and look at things differently. And you had said it came out from isolation. And I think that is really what, one would sort of like, for me, that's a very wonderful way to sort of be immersed or change your view or get to know something different. Because a lot of the time we're so disconnected from nature because of the pace of our lives. And despite all the horrible things which has happened, one way to think about this moment is actually to pause and think about what are we missing or what don't we know, which we could be developing and treasuring and protecting. So really a moment to contemplate this. Yes. I was telling you when we were speaking, like one thing because you were talking about listening and the sense, and something I started to do during lockdown was just listen to nature in the mornings. I mean, you can actually hear all kinds of birds, you can actually hear the breeze, and it's quite noisy. Yes. When you actually pause and listen, and your piece sort of really resonated emotionally with me a lot.
Yeah, I remember you saying like the nature is never silent. Like, and
silent.
Yeah, and then I guess this piece as well is like kind of bringing that up, and once kind of encountering it, that is, like everything is already there. And that slows you down, then maybe there is a chance for creating a different kind of relationship and maybe responsibility as well.
Yeah, that's why I found one thing which I quite liked is the synchronous, like how you managed to keep it in sync with technology, right? It didn't seem to be jarring. And often in the popular narratives, you think about economic growth has to come at the cost of nature, or technology is at the cost of nature, So often there is sort of like this contradicting relationship. And I think, in some sense, we have to have a mindset change as well, and think about what we're losing, what we're gaining from these things. And a break in moments like this is actually quite an important one to really reflect on how we should be, what we're losing and what we're gaining and what we already have.
Yeah, I think that kind of brings it back to unknowing, because I think unknowing is always kind of like taking a risk of kind of leaving behind what we know. And, encountering and experiencing things in a different way, which then can have a more permanent.
Yeah, and that's actually what I've been really hoping for is some sort of I don't know if I'm a pessimist or optimist in this way, but I'm hopeful that we can basically use these moments to basically create more systemic change for sort of a better, sort of more balanced, more sustainable future. Otherwise, it looks quite dire. So we have to use this moment to create, and I think pause at these moments and really leverage these moments and these interactions to really change the way we live our lives and change our behavior and talk to people about these issues. So yeah, I think that was, for me, this really resonated with me a lot, and I sort of really visually, it gave me a bit of hope. So that was, yeah, it's very I really appreciate that.
Thank you. That's great.
Do you know, we have, when we're almost out of time, but we have one question from Sophie Gledhill. I'm going to read it out, and maybe you could respond, Josefina.
Okay.
As a musician working to promote environmental sustainability, I absolutely love this work. I was wondering, I think it came up when you were doing the clouds. We were talking about the clouds installation, the second one, Supersaturation. I was wondering, how do you approach the issue of getting through to people who aren't already on board with your environmental aims? This is the $1 million question. I guess people will only download apps if they're already engaged with the issues at hand. It's something I'm always thinking about. It's something I'm always thinking about too. Yeah.
It's a good question, and it is a challenge. And also, I guess there's always like a lot of, like, my work, of course, it can be experienced on a totally sensory level, but also I always hope that maybe this sensory experience can then create curiosity towards the actual information. And yeah, like, can this artwork create accessibility for difficult information? And so that's why I included a small info section in the app. I had quite a few public events and launches to promote also, and try to get people to find the app from the app stores if they are interested. Of course, like, it's everyone's own choice. And for example, with the work Supersaturation, there was also an event where I was discussing more about the science and the concepts behind the work, and how does this data system work. Because I think once you understand how the process works, then you become aware of the more kind of rational information behind it. And yeah, so I guess my answer is like just events and public engagement, and just like being with the work is one solution.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think from my side, I think always you could talk to people. Usually people, there's a feeling that people might disagree with you about these things. And in many cases, yes. But I think just having conversations with people and getting them to talk to others and actually framing it in terms that they understand can be quite powerful. So often, like, if you talk to, I'm from India, so if you talk to people about how the weather has changed or air pollution, it really resonates with people. Climate change, on the other hand, is quite a politicized term. So, you know, testing and trialing imaginative ways to frame your conversations can be quite a way to open up new channels to engage as well.
And I think, multidisciplinary is always a good way.
Just get out of the bubble. Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much, everyone. I think we're sort of just out of running out of time there, but no, that was very interesting. I think this question of, you know, our ability to sort of leave behind whilst being motivated enough to make a positive change and sort of form a deeper understanding to our actions, both now and past, and also moving forward, is definitely a sort of theme that is coming out of not only this time we're in, but also very much when it relates to our welfare and also to the environment around us. So thank you very much, Ganga. Thank you very much, Josefina. Thank you very much, Sophie, and everyone else who joined today. We have another talk on next Tuesday, the 25th at 4 p.m, looking at identity and data ethics. What does it mean to be a human in a digital space? And I feel that there'll be similar sort of questions here as well, and similar sort of things arousing it. So if you're available, then yeah, please do join.
Thanks so much for having us. This has been fantastic.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.
Bye.